Well, hello everyone. Dr. David Ejibade here with the Brain and Body Foundation, and I'm here with Dr. Barry Sears, who is the founding director of about 3 or more companies, of all of which I have benefited from. So, Dr. Sears, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for all you do to educate us and to inform and to provide absolutely top-notch nutraceuticals. Now, I never told you this before, but we've been using your Omega RX now for quite a while, and of course the liquid Omega for our kids with brain disorders, and now for strokes and dementia and autism. And once in a while, people would, they would try taking something else, or we would get someone maybe donates another kind of Omega, and then we're like, let's try and ration the Omega RX because we don't have enough of them, and we'd give them the other Omegas, and they would go home and then they'll come back after a month and they'll be like, Doc, please, can we have the other one? Over and over and over again. So we know, we've tested the Omega RX, and I gotta say, there is none like it, quite frankly. There is none like it. So we appreciate you just being faithful to purity and to the highest quality.
Well, thank you very much for those kind comments, but you have to be, because again, these omega-3 fatty acids are very fragile. They're very powerful, but they have to basically maintain the purity and the protection of the omega-3 fatty acids to do their job. And it's really an art form that I've spent personally about 40 years working on in terms of understanding how to do new manufacturing technologies that can give better and better quality materials. And the reason why, because you've seen in your own hands the benefits of high quality material, not only in terms of brain disorders, but virtually every other disorder.
Right. That must be a lot more costly, though, just to trying to get that better quality materials and manufacturing and all that.
Well, it's a commitment. It's a commitment to excellence, and that's how you want to go through life, being committed to excellence.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it. And I know you've developed a lot of things over the years, and so I cannot wait. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, today I want to talk about the concept of both inflammation and its resolution, and to go into a little more detail of the science. I say it's all controlled by the diet. They say, yeah. I say, let me tell you how the diet controls it. The diet is a very powerful drug, but you have to treat it like a drug. Be taken at the right dosage at the right time. And if you do, you can now basically begin to unravel the complexity of nutrition, how it controls our hormones, how it controls our expression of our genes. Diet ultimately becomes really the ultimate genetic engineering tool. And if we know how to control it, we go to the core of not what causes disease, but how to heal the injuries that eventually cause disease. And that opens up a whole new area of medicine.
Well, I can't wait. I'm going to let me share my screen. I'll allow you to share your screen, excuse me, so we can really get into this and really understand what you're talking about, because this sounds very alien to most people.
Don't worry, it sounds alien to most people here in America too. Okay, let me basically get my screen up here.
Go ahead and.
Well, David, what I want to do, excuse me, what I like to do in this lecture is give an overview of the relationship between inflammation and resolution. We often think of inflammation as the bane of medicine. Over 15 years ago, the major mass market magazine in America, Time magazine, ran this as their cover story: the secret killer, the surprising link between inflammation, heart attacks, cancer, Alzheimer's, and other diseases. We include in those other diseases COVID-19. So I say, my God, inflammation, we must get rid of it. The answer is not so quick. It's because we need a zone. If we had too little of an inflammatory response, our bodies would be a sitting target for microbes. our physical injuries would never heal. So we need some. But if we have too much of an inflammatory response, or it's not turned off, the body begins to attack itself. So, like a drug, we need inflammation, but we have to keep it in a zone. Not too high, but not too low. Inflammation is incredibly complex. So let me try to simplify it a little on this slide. Think of inflammation as causing damage. Think of resolution causing healing. And from that perspective, we can now begin to look at how to balance these two parts of the inflammatory process. Well, the question might be, we know that inflammation causes damage, but what controls healing? It's what I call the resolution response. It's deeply buried in our genes. We all carry it. But if we don't activate it, then our ability to turn off inflammation will not occur. So here's how the resolution response works. Our body will be exposed to an injury. And there are many types of injuries that can do this. But the acute inflammation, the pain, the swelling, the redness that you experience is because of an increase in hormones or inflammatory mediators known as eicosanoids and cytokines. We hear a lot about cytokines today, the cytokine storm associated with COVID-19. That's because you have an injury. You're being infected by the virus, and the body is responding by making more cytokines. But once you get acute inflammation, this is the starting point to turning it off. The alpha becomes the omega. So the acute inflammation has to now be turned off by the resolution response. This is vastly more complex because it requires three distinct steps. One, you have to reduce inflammation. That means reducing the levels of these cytokines and eicosanoids. Then you have to resolve inflammation. That means turning it off. You have to make a new group of hormones called resolvins. But now you have to finally repair the damage. For this, you have to turn on the master gene transcription factor that controls our metabolism. And this is called AMPK. Only when each of these three steps is being completed in sequential basis will we get healing. And that's why this resolution response has been so unknown, because it's so complex. Yet, as I'll show you in this lecture, it's controlled primarily by our diet. What are some of the types of injuries that could induce inflammation? Well, we've talked about two of them. One is microbial injuries, bacterial or viral. Another might be external injuries. You break your arm. But you could also have internal injuries. Bad blood flow that's causing lesions on the interior of the artery that causes atherosclerotic lesions. One of our greatest cause of injuries is now our diet. And that includes a leaky gut, letting microbes into our body to cause inflammatory responses. Surgery is another form of injury. Yes, we have to go in and solve the problem, but in doing so, we're causing an injury. Many drugs, especially cancer drugs, also cause inflammation. And there are stressors like intense exercise, pollution, toxin exposure, or emotional stressors. All these can cause inflammation. So you can see now from this list, the number of things in our life that can cause inflammation is quite robust. And the fact we exist at all is amazing, because we all have that resolution response that helps turn this off. But the extent of that resolution response depends on a number of dietary factors, which I'll go into later. But this resolution response is an on-demand response. Basically, it's quiescent, it's quiet in the body, assuming there's no injury. But once an injury causes inflammation, that actually turns on the resolution response. And it's a highly orchestrated series of hormonal and genetic actions needed for success. Think of this as a relay team. You might have the best relay runners on the team, but if the baton is not being handed off correctly, they're not going to finish the race. And here's the key component. Every step of the resolution response can be blocked by poor dietary choices. And if any one of those 3 steps of the resolution response is blocked, you will not have complete healing. And eventually that leads to chronic disease. Now, what are the molecular players of this resolution response? It's one thing to talk about this as some concept, but the molecular players are at the cutting edge of today's biotechnology. They include hormones and gene transcription factors. What are gene transcription factors? These are master switches. They either turn on or turn off inflammation and also cause repair of the body. So what the hormones that we want to control are eicosanoids and resolvins. These are the hormones, the eicosanoids either increase the intensity of the inflammation, but the resolvins turn it off. You need them both, but in a balance. The gene transcription factors include nuclear factor kappa B and AMPK. Without enough kappa B, we could not mount an inflammatory response. But it's AMPK that turns it off and causes healing. So these 4 factors, which are under dietary control, I put in a format of a gyroscope. And as long as you keep that gyroscope balanced, you will lead a healthy and productive life. But like a gyroscope, when it falls over, bad things happen. And that's what's happening today throughout the world because of changes in our diet that's causing this otherwise natural balancing system to tilt over and no longer be functional. So what happens if this resolution response is blocked? Well, now we have a situation of having unresolved inflammation. We have the injury causes inflammation, but the resolution response is blocked. Now this inflammation doesn't disappear like the mist off the Irish moor. It becomes chronic unresolved inflammation. It's below the perception of pain, but you can measure it. But since you can't feel it, you do nothing to stop it. And this unresolved inflammation now can be transformed into 2 different formats, which become permanent in your body. One is called fibrosis. This is also scar tissue. And the other is cellular senescence, when now normal cells become transformed, like a cancer cell, but their transformation phenotype is not uncontrolled growth, but constant putting out more inflammation. Both of these, the fibrosis and the cellular senescence, lead to chronic disease. Think of an atherosclerotic lesion. It's scar tissue on the inner wall of the blood vessel. And the cellular senescence, it's almost another way of looking at this as zombie cells, that the senescent cells can induce nearby cells to become senescent and build up the levels of inflammation in that organ. And what organ in your body has the greatest amount of senescent cells? The answer is your fat tissue. Excess body fat is a breeding ground for zombie cells that can spread to other organs in your body to cause new forms of inflammation. So if your goal is to treat chronic disease or infectious disease, you have to have an optimal resolution response. It's purely of fanciful thinking, saying, oh, there'll be some drug to do this. Say, there's no drug that can change these hormones and change these gene transcription factors. And therefore, your results will always be not as good as they could be because you need an optimal resolution response to heal the body. So optimizing this resolution response requires what I call the 3 R's. First, you have to reduce diet-induced inflammation. Our diet is now becoming the primary cause of inflammation in our body. But just reducing it is not enough. You have to resolve any residual unresolved inflammation. And finally, you have to repair the damage caused by that unresolved inflammation. These are your three relay runners. Each one has to complete their task before the next one can start. And only when all three are completed in unison, in orchestration, will you have healing. So what are the three dietary control points that are important to the resolution response? One is a zone diet. What does it do? It reduces the activation of that gene transcription factor, nuclear factor kappa B, that turns on inflammation. The omega-3 fatty acids are also important. Why? They control the balance of eicosanoids and resolvins. And the polyphenols. Polyphenols are the chemicals that give fruits and vegetables their color. They're key for increasing the activation of AMPK. So you see, what you have are three distinct dietary interventions, each doing different things, but they have to do them completely, finish their task, if your goal is to have healing. So let's look at the zone diet first. The zone diet that I developed some 40 years ago was not to lose weight. It was to reduce diet-induced inflammation. It's using diet as a drug to keep inflammation in a zone. Not too high, but not too low. So what causes diet-induced inflammation? Well, there are many things, and that's the problem. Number one is increased intake of calories. Why? If you take in too many calories at a meal, you'll start to cause increased inflammation in your fat cells. And that inflammation can now spread to other organs. You also cause inflammation in the appetite control centers in the brain that normally say stop eating. This is why junk food is such a almost irresistible drug. Junk food is designed to basically disrupt the signals coming from the gut to the brain saying stop eating. And so basically the keep on eating signal is continually reinforced. The second aspect is the increased consumption of omega-6 fatty acids. This was a relatively rare component of the human diet until the early part of the 20th century. Now, omega-6 fatty acids found in vegetable oils are the second least expensive food ingredient known to mankind, just slightly more expensive than refined table sugar. Why is this important? Because the more omega-6 fatty acids you have in your diet, the more eicosanoids you make, and these are the hormones that basically intensify inflammation. Another source of fats are saturated fats, things like especially palmitic acid, because these can activate that gene transcription factor, nuclear factor kappa B, by interacting with receptors on the surface of every cell in your body. These receptors are meant to look for bacterial fragments, alerting the body we're under microbial attack. But the palmitic acid and other saturated fatty acids can fool the receptors to send a false signal to the cell to say, unleash the dogs of war, we're under attack. No, you just had too much saturated fat in the meal. We can also have glycosylated proteins. These proteins interact with other receptors on the surface to activate nuclear factor kappa B. These are called RAGE, receptors for advanced glycosylated end products. Now, how do you know if you have a lot of these in your blood? The simple blood test of A1C, glycosylated hemoglobin. That's our definition of diabetes. If your A1C is high, you have many glycosylated proteins. So you can, by looking at your blood, say, my God, I'm doing everything to keep my inflammation response totally activated. And finally, there's what is called metabolic endotoxemia. This is when fragments of microbes in the gut enter the body through a leaky gut. We talk a lot about a leaky gut. What does this really mean? It means microbial fragments are entering into the bloodstream at higher levels and causing the activation of nuclear factor kappa B. So we can see our diet has many ways, many diverse ways to increase inflammation. And this is why diet has become our primary cause of inflammation in the 21st century. So now we can view the zone diet not as a diet to lose weight, but an anti-inflammatory diet, a diet designed to reduce inflammation. Now, such a diet is also highly defined like a drug. It has to be calorie restricted because excess calorie intake is one of the primary causes of inflammation. But you can't be hungry. So how do you restrict calories and not be hungry? The diet has to be adequate in protein because the protein causes the release of certain hormones in the gut that go directly to your brain to say, stop eating. If you don't have enough protein at a meal, there's no stop eating signal being sent to the brain. And what do? You keep eating. It also has to be moderate in low glycemic carbohydrates. You need some, but not too much. Now, what does the word low glycemic mean? It means the carbohydrates enter the bloodstream as glucose slowly. What type of carbohydrates do that? Fruits and vegetables. This is why the data is so clear. The more fruits and vegetables you eat, the longer you live. But your diet has to also be low in fat. Why? Most of us has plenty of excess body fat to draw upon, but low in fat because, again, the omega-6 fats and the saturated fats are powerful causers of the inflammatory response. And finally, it has to be rich in fermentable fiber. Why? Because if you don't feed the microbes in your gut with fiber, they're going to get hungry. They're going to get mean, and they're going to cause endotoxemia. And pretty soon, your gut is inflamed, and soon your blood is inflamed. So this is the definition of the zone diet. Highly defined, but very achievable in every culture in today's world. And it's also defined in terms of balance. You'd like to have about 40% of the calories coming from these low-carb carbohydrates, about 30% from protein, 30% from fat, primarily monounsaturated fat, but it's a low-calorie diet. You say, I would die eating 1,500 calories a day. I turn the tables on you and say, I guarantee you will find it incredibly difficult to eat 1,500 calories a day if you follow the zone diet. But calories, percent calories is so deceiving. Let's put it in terms of the absolute amounts of these macronutrients you would be consuming. Let's say for a woman on 1,200 calories a day, that she might be consuming about 120 grams of carbohydrate throughout the day, but spread evenly like a drug throughout the day. For a male, it might be 1,500 calories or about 150 calories per day, but that'd be about 150 grams of carbohydrates, but again, spread equally throughout the day like a drug. The amount of protein for an average female would be about 90 grams per day, but spread equally throughout the day. And for a male, about 110 grams. And the levels of fat, they're low in both cases. So what you're looking at saying, I think I could do this. This is not that hard, but why am I not hungry? It's because you're balancing your hormones. You're using food as a drug to balance your hormones, to keep the hormones in the blood in a zone. The two primary hormones that change when we eat, and they change very rapidly, one is called insulin, caused by the levels of carbohydrates you eat, and the other is called glucagon, caused by the amount of protein you eat. So let's say you eat a high carbohydrate diet that has too much glucose, especially glucose that enters the bloodstream very quickly. Now, fruits and vegetables, that's not the case. But things like sugar, processed foods, they rush right in. And with that excess dietary glucose comes fat accumulation. What's the best way to basically make a rat fat? You feed them a high fat, high carbohydrate diet. What's the best way to make a human fat? You feed them a high fat, high carbohydrate diet, which means you feed them lots of processed foods. Because processed foods are meant to be using the cheapest ingredients, that is, omega-6 fats and refined sugars and add some additives to it to make them taste better. And now, presto, you now have $1 billion or $1 trillion industry of feeding people processed foods around the world. Oh, I know the answer. Don't eat any carbohydrates. Wrong answer. That's called a ketogenic diet. Now you don't have enough glucose, and now the brain gets concerned because the brain's primary fuel is glucose. So you need some glucose coming in at every meal to keep the brain happy. So if you don't eat enough glucose, what does the body do? It starts producing more of the hormone cortisol to break down muscle and turn in glucose for the brain. Do this long enough, and all of a sudden, three things happen. You gain weight. You basically depress your immune system, and you're more likely to develop chronic disease. So what you are looking for is a balance, a zone, where you can keep carbohydrates and proteins balanced at every meal. This is no different than driving your car. You can't drive your car all on gas, and you can't drive your car all on air. You need some combination. And the better the combination, the better the mileage of the car. The same is true for the food. You want to have the right hormonal carburetor, keeping the balance of protein to carbohydrate at every meal so you get the best hormonal mileage for each meal. That hormonal mileage is measured by how long that you're not hungry from one meal to the next. Now, I said these hormones can change quickly. How quickly? Really in a matter of minutes. This is work done at Harvard Medical School in 1999, taking 3 meals, giving to overweight adolescents, staying in a hospital overnight. They would wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, insert catheters in their arms, and then give them a meal. Each meal contained 400 calories. They would do this on 3 separate occasions. Each meal had 400 calories, but some meals were a high carbohydrate, high glycemic meal, like a breakfast cereal. A second meal would be a high carbohydrate, but lower glycemic meal, like oatmeal. The third meal would be a zone meal. So even though the calories were identical, let's look at what happened to the hormone insulin. With the 2 high carbohydrate meals, it spiked and came down very rapidly. But look what happened to the zone meal. It increased, but not nearly the height, and it came down more slowly. But let's look at the hormone glucagon. Now the differences are even greater. On the 2 high carbohydrate meals, it was depressed for the next 5 hours. But on the zone meal, it was actually increased. Now, why is this important? The hormone glucagon causes the body to mobilize stored carbohydrates from the liver to enter the bloodstream to keep the brain happy. If the brain's happy, you're never hungry. If the brain's not happy, you're always hungry. So you can see here that in only a short period of time, the changes by changing the balance of protein to carbohydrate in a meal can give rise to dramatic changes in hormones. Now, what's important about this slide is not how rapidly hormones change and how the changed balance of protein to carbohydrate can control that, but when they now gave the same child the same meal for lunch that they had for breakfast, then they brought them into a conference room and observed them for the next 5 hours. And in the conference room, they had all sorts of snacks on the table. Cookies, donuts, chips, TV sets, coloring books. So just enjoy yourself for the next 5 hours. But they were keeping careful notes of what the kids ate. And the children who had 2 zone meals back to back, these were obese adolescents to begin with, they ate 46% fewer calories in the next 5-hour period. No intervention studies, no exercise program, no psychological counseling. They weren't hungry. And if you're not hungry, that's the best way to lose weight because you're not always eating. But I said the zone diet was not developed to reduce weight. It was developed to reduce insulin resistance. Now, what's insulin resistance? Well, It's really complex, as usual in the body. We need some insulin because it's the central control point that instructs our body how to basically orchestrate our metabolism. But when you get insulin resistance, this is an inability to transmit insulin signal into the interior of the cell to tell the cell what to do. Essentially, the hormonal communication system becomes garbled. It's like having a cell phone and a bad connection. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. That's what insulin resistance does to the cell, because insulin is a central control point for your metabolism. If we had no insulin, you would die. Says, oh, insulin's the evil one. Say, if you had no insulin, you would die. So you have to keep insulin not only in a zone in the blood, but it has to transmit this message from the blood to the cell. So this is why insulin resistance is so interrelated to chronic diseases. This was just a recent scan I went through the U.S. public medical libraries, looking just for the number of articles relating the word insulin resistance and different chronic disease states, like overweight, obesity, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's. You see a lot of articles, research articles, relating insulin resistance to all these chronic disease states. But let's focus on diabetes. Because what causes diabetes? The answer is insulin resistance. So 10 years after I wrote my first book, the Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard Medical School announced their new guidelines for treating type 2 diabetes. 40% low glycemic carbohydrates, 20 to 30% low-fat protein, 30% to 40% fat, and about 1,200 to 1,500 calories a day. Strikingly similar to the zone diet. But if you ask the people at Harvard, say, we thought about this all by ourselves, which could be true, but the zone was #1 best-selling book in the New York Times bestseller list a decade earlier. But that's okay. As my friends at Harvard say, we agree. Now, why is insulin resistance so insidious? Think of insulin resistance like a champagne fountain at a wedding. At a wedding, nothing is more glorious to celebrate a wedding. You have a number of glasses of champagne and tears. You fill up the first glass until it overflows into the second glass, and then it fills up and overflows the next one to the next. It's a wonderful celebration of the wedding. We can use that same analogy to say, what happens when you develop insulin resistance? Well, the first glass fills up and you start to gain weight. But now when it spills over, now you develop diabetes. And once you develop diabetes, you're now 4 times more likely to get cardiovascular disease and twice as likely to get Alzheimer's. As insulin resistance increases, diabetes, heart disease, and Alzheimer's will also increase on a worldwide basis. How do you stop insulin resistance? You follow the zone diet, which was developed to basically stop insulin resistance. It was developed as a drug, not a diet. But even if you do that, that's only the first step toward healing, because the zone diet will reduce very effectively diet-induced inflammation. But you still have to resolve and repair the damage caused by that inflammation. To do that, you'll need 2 other dietary interventions. One are omega-3 fatty acids, and the other are polyphenols. So let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids and really high-dose omega-3 fatty acids, because these are needed to resolve inflammation. We often think of inflammation from this image of a burning fire, burns brightly and then dies out the embers. It's a wonderful image. Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with inflammation, because inflammation, once it's turned on, will continue burning. It might not burn as intensely, but you've never turned off the flames. That's what resolution does. It turns off the flames of inflammation. And here's a time course of inflammation and resolution. Remember, these are tied together. Initially, you'll see a rise of what's called edema and pain and swelling. This is as neutrophils and macrophages begin to enter the damaged site. And now you get the more pain as you have biological warfare taking place at the site. Lots of damage, lots of killing. But now you have the second phase of inflammation, the resolution, where now the immune cells are changed and basically start cleaning up the damage and causing the repair of the tissue. And if everything goes correctly, the damage heals. Here's an example. I cut my hand. Initially, I have pain, swelling, redness. That's the initiation of inflammation. If my resolution response is working effectively, within a few days, my hand has healed completely, as if I've turned back the hands of time, as if the injury had never occurred. But what happens if my resolution response is not working well? Well, I will have unresolved inflammation, and that will give rise to fibrosis in the skin. You see it as a scar tissue. Scar tissue of that cut hand is as a consequence of an unresolved inflammatory attack. So how do these omega-3 fatty acids resolve inflammation? Well, they really don't by themselves, because they're simply the building blocks of a group of hormones discovered at Harvard about 20 years ago that basically turn off inflammation. There's about 100 resolvins known. They're being discovered, new ones are being discovered all the time, but they're incredibly complex structures. But they can only be made by the body if you have adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the body. The converse is, if you don't, you can't make resolvins. If you can't make resolvins, you can't turn off inflammation. So now the $64 question is, how much omega-3 fatty acids do I need to be able to mount a resolution response? The answer is, it depends. Let's say you want to maintain wellness. That means you look good in a swimsuit, you have no chronic disease. You'll need about 2.5 grams every day of omega-3 fatty acids to have sufficient levels in the blood to turn off inflammation. And this is why your grandparents or great-grandparents gave your relatives or your fathers or grandparents a tablespoon of cod liver oil every day. Disgusting food, but it contains 2.5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids. But what if you're not quite so well? What if you're obese? You have diabetes. You have heart disease. You need more to make the resolvins that turn off inflammation. But what if you now have chronic pain, like rheumatoid arthritis, or the pain associated with cancer? The levels are still higher. And what if the inflammation is now inside the brain? You have severe brain trauma, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, ADHD, depression, anxiety. The levels are still higher. Why? Because you need more in the blood to get resolvins into the brain. Now, these are high levels, make no mistake about it, but they're also therapeutic levels. You give a placebo dose of omega-3 fatty acids, you will always get a placebo dose, a placebo effect. So again, just like a drug, you had to give an appropriate dose. And the test you use is to look at the balance of these two fatty acids in the blood. One is the omega-6 fatty acid called arachidonic acid. This drives inflammation. The other is the omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, that causes resolution. It's the balance of these two fatty acids in the blood that allows you to control the inflammatory response. Now, you could guess, but in medicine, it's always better to test. So one of the things we've developed in the United States is a finger stick test. Very simple test. A drop of blood can tell you your balance of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids, and really your ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA. Notice the higher the number, the worse off you are. Where are most Americans today? They're about 20. That's why we have the greatest healthcare expenditures in the world, because we're the most inflamed population in the world. And if you get COVID-19 and you have to go to the hospital, the data is quite clear that those who go to the hospital, not everybody who gets COVID-19 basically has to go to the hospital, but those who do have exceptionally high levels of omega-3 or of arachidonic acid to EPA. How high? Studies we've done at the University of Miami Medical School say about 40. That's high. So I say, okay, well, it's really hard to get down to the target zone. Say, not really, because this happens to be my test. I test my blood every 6 months. Why? I want to make sure that my ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA is in the target zone to give me the best chance to resolve inflammation. You don't guess about these things, you test about them. But to get to that ratio, for me, I require a fairly high levels of omega-3 fatty acids. Why? I'm older. I'm 74 years old now, so that's old. But so you say you keep adjusting until you say, what's the right amount do I need? It's personalized medicine. Now, the first use of high-dose omega-3 fatty acids to lower cytokine levels. And when I talk about cytokines, because this is the cause of all the problems, the complications of COVID-19, cytokine storms. But you also get cytokine storms when you get sepsis. And when you get sepsis, your mortality rate's about 50%. So we have to really lower cytokines. I need a drug. Well, it turns out that people at Harvard Medical School showed 30 years ago, you don't need a drug, but you do need high levels of omega-3 fatty acids. So what they did, they took normal individuals, healthy, and looked at the ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA. You can see now, 30 years ago in America, the levels were already high, about 20. And when they gave them about 5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids per day, within about a short period of time, their levels were reduced by about 90%. And then when they stopped giving the omega-3 fatty acids, within a relatively short period of time, they went right back up to the same high levels they were before. Now, this is not the goal of the study. The goal of the study is saying, could you change the levels of cytokines? And the answer is yes, and dramatically so. But once you stopped giving the omega-3 fatty acids, the levels of the cytokines went right back up again. Okay, interesting study, got lost in the literature. But we know today the primary predictor of who will get complications of COVID-19 are people who are elderly or obese. So let's take elderly obese individuals and give them omega-3 fatty acids. Well, you can see within 4 weeks, their levels drop dramatically compared to the control group. But what about the levels of their cytokines? They too drop dramatically. Again, a confirmation, even in those people who have a weak immune system because they're old and because they're obese, yet you can drop the levels of these inflammatory mediators rapidly just by giving them omega-3 fatty acids. It can't be that easy. You need infusions of monoclonal antibodies. They're saying, give me a break. No, you need a tablespoon and put spoon in mouth. That's all there is to it. But even if you give the adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids to resolve the inflammation, now we have to do the really hard step to repair the damage, to regenerate the tissue. That's why we need the polyphenols. They activate that gene transcription factor, AMPK, that causes the body to regenerate damaged tissue and in the process, live longer. Now, this AMPK is an agent of conserved energy sensor. It controls every aspect of our body. This is a chart that only looks at some of the small number of things that happen when you activate AMPK. We'll also focus on a couple of things. If you activate AMPK, you turn down, or you inhibit nuclear factor kappa B, and what happens? The levels of cytokines and eicosanoids drop dramatically. You need AMPK to be activated to make a vaccine work. If you give a vaccine and AMPK is not activated, it will not be able to basically train the B cells and T cells to recognize the viral particle. And it does everything. It turns off excess cholesterol synthesis. It makes you basically burn body fat. It makes new mitochondria, so you live longer. How can one thing do so many things? It's the central hub that controls our metabolism. And if you're blocking AMPK, you're blocking your metabolism. If you're blocking your metabolism, you're shortening your lifespan. So let's make this simpler. AMPK repairs damaged tissue. If you do that, you live longer. Well, where's my drug? There is no drug. Why? AMPK is too complex for any drug to basically activate it on a continual basis. But your diet can, if you treat your diet like a drug. Now, here's our, again, as we get into metabolism, it gets more complex. That's why people basically say, oh, nutrition, it's so simple. Everybody's an expert. It's so simple because it's so complex, people basically make up fantasy lands. So let's look at AMPK. AMPK can be affected by these polyphenols, not directly. The polyphenols will interact with enzymes known as sirtuins that affect an upstream gene factor LKB1 that turns on AMPK, that makes NAD, that makes more now, that activates the SIRT1. So you get a cycle. If you can get the polyphenols in the body, that cycle continues. And the longer that cycle works, the longer you live. But if you don't have the polyphenols in the body, the cycle stops. And where do you find polyphenols? Fruits and vegetables. That's why they're so remarkable on longevity. They supply the polyphenols to keep the cycle going. Now, here's the problem with polyphenols. You have to eat lots of fruits and vegetables to get enough. They're not very concentrated. Maybe 1% of the weight of vegetables are polyphenols, maybe 2% in fruits. Second, they're not absorbed very well. If they don't get in the blood, they can't help you. And if they get in the blood, they don't last very long. Says, oh my God, my life is going to be ruined. Say, no, these are just challenges to overcome. Now, how do you overcome? Well, this gives an example about the need to be in the blood. This is work done in Tuscany, Italy, with the old people still following the traditional Mediterranean diet. They thought the more polyphenols they ate, the longer they'd live. So they kept careful food records of these elderly Italians. And on chart B, they say there seemed to be no correlation between the amount of polyphenols they ate and their longevity. This made no sense. Then the investigators realized perhaps the polyphenols have to get into the body. If you take a drug and it doesn't get in the body, it's not going to work. So now, it's hard to measure polyphenols in the blood, but you can measure their metabolites in the urine. The only way you can get in the urine, they have to get in the blood first. And now they found out exactly what they're looking for. Those older Italians who had the most polyphenols in the urine lived longer. How much longer? 31% longer. So like a drug, they have to get into the blood to do their job and then be doing that on a continual basis. So now we can look at the dietary activators. There's no drug to activate AMPK, but there are dietary activators. The polyphenols, if they get in the blood, are your best, but not the only one. The omega-3 fatty acids, if taken in high enough levels to make resolvins, can also activate AMPK. And the zone diet, because of its calorie restriction, also activates AMPK. Any one of these three is good. But what if you have all three working together? Now you have a powerful drug. Not a powerful drug, a powerful new technology, a new powerful biotechnology to activate the key factor that basically extends our lifespan. But there are also dietary inhibitors of AMPK. One is excess calorie intake. If you have excess body fat, your levels of AMPK are dropped by about half. And the other way to inhibit AMPK, eat too many carbohydrates. So we have dietary activators and dietary inhibitors. The choice is yours. Do you want to live longer or shorter? You want to live a longer life with greater health or a shorter life with more chronic diseases? Choice becomes a very simple one, in my opinion. So now we go back to our primary goal. Our primary problem in the 21st century is saying we are so focused on saying what causes chronic disease. We should be asking the question, why doesn't our body heal more effectively? So if we want to have healing, we need an integrated dietary approach. Any one is good, but only when all three are working together will you be in what I call the zone. It means you're following the zone diet to reduce inflammation. You're taking omega-3 fatty acids to resolve inflammation. And you're taking polyphenols to repair the damage. And when they're all working together, you're in the zone. I said, that sounds so like a Hollywood story. How do you know you're in the zone? The blood will tell you. There are simple blood markers that can be done, all using a drop of blood. The ratio of triglycerides to HDL will tell you your levels of insulin resistance. The lower it is, the longer you live. The ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA will tell you your levels of existing inflammation in the blood. The lower the ratio, the longer you live. Your glycosylated hemoglobin, a marker used to look at diabetes, will tell you how active or how inhibited AMPK is. If it's between, let's say, lower, you live longer. If it's higher, as in diabetics, you live shorter. But we have to have numbers. So what are those numbers? The ratio of triglyceride to HDL should be less than 1. This means your insulin resistance is low. Your ratio of arachidonic acid to EPA should be between 1.5 and 3. You need both, but they have to be balanced. And your glycosylated hemoglobin should be between 4.9 and 5.1%. This means your AMPK is not being inhibited. So all of a sudden, we have markers not only of inflammation, but markers of longevity. And all these have to be in their appropriate ranges to be in the zone. If they are, you have done everything in your power to increase your longevity and to increase your ability to repair the damage caused by inflammation. Think of these markers as of navigational gauges. They'll tell you whether you're in the zone or not. And if they're not, you can make adjustments on various aspects of your diet to bring them into the appropriate ranges. And if you can, then you're likely to be able to land this plane effectively. If not, you're likely to crash. So, question is, how long does it take to get to the zone? It'll take you about 3 to 6 months with a correct nutritional program to get in the zone where all three of those markers are in their appropriate ranges. Well, that's okay. How long does it take to leave the zone? Less than 2 weeks. You say, you mean I have to eat like this the rest of my life? And the answer is yes. It's like if you have a chronic disease, say, doctor, do I have to take this drug the rest of my life? Only if you want to live. Okay, I'll take it. But now we're dealing with food as a drug, taking it the right dosage at the right time, but basically the rewards are far greater if you choose to. If not, Pray that there's some new biotechnology breakthrough that'll save you from yourself, but don't count on it. So what I've tried to do in this short lecture is give a new vision of medicine going forward. The dietary control of the resolution response will be the key to healing of any injury-induced inflammation. But optimal healing requires an integrated dietary control of key hormonal and genetic mechanisms. This means food becomes the cutting edge of biotechnology. It can do things that drugs cannot even never imagine doing. Why? Food is more powerful if used correctly. But the opposite is true. Food used incorrectly, it becomes the greatest source of disease known on a worldwide basis. Now, I like to be, I thought about these all by myself, but actually these are old concepts. When Hippocrates said some 2,500 years ago, let food be your medicine and let medicine be your food, he was talking about how food can optimize the resolution response. 50 years ago, when Linus Pauling said, use the right nutrient at the right dose, he was talking about the resolution response. These are two pretty smart guys. So all I've tried to do is basically give a little more detail and definition of how powerful this resolution response is. And if you use it and practice it, you can see dramatic differences in relatively short periods of time. But you have to continue using it to allow the body to continually healing itself, because we're constantly exposed to injuries. And those injuries cause inflammation. And unless we resolve that inflammation, our life will be more brutish than it should be. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Sears. This is probably one of the most comprehensive lectures I've had. And I'm going to take the screen back now.
Okay, I'll basically stop sharing. All right.
Okay, perfect. Great. Whoa, man, this is a lot of content. I'm just looking, what can we do with this? We're going to maybe take out break a few parts here and there and share that, because this is interesting stuff. So, the point that kept on sticking out in my mind is, this is not just talking about prevention. This goes beyond prevention, because
it's basically it's healing. Now, we never use the word healing in medicine, but it's healing. Saying, what if we understood how the body heals?
Mm-hmm.
What are the consequences? It changes the way we practice medicine.
Absolutely. Because when you think about prevention, you're thinking, okay, you go for your yearly check. Your doctor has about 5 or 6 diseases they're concerned about. You got cancer we're concerned about. You got heart disease we're concerned about, and then I don't know, brain. I don't know what
it doesn't matter which of the 5 diseases you have or 6 diseases. They're all caused by a blocked resolution response.
Exactly. So that is really what should be monitored and checked.
Exactly. And that's why you have your field gauges.
Right.
That require very simple testing.
Right. That's crazy. Yeah, some things too. When we started the building strength webinars, which you were part of a few years ago, that was the whole idea too. It was like, okay, how do we strengthen the body so that the body itself now protects you against all these other diseases you're concerned about? But not just that, you are optimized. Your health is optimized. Your brain is optimized, and this is pretty much the answer to it.
That's why it's taken me 40 years to get this point.
That is fantastic. All right, so this is a personal question. When we were talking about the zone, optimized zone, you were talking about your levels are pretty good for I believe it was 1.8. You said?
Yes.
How much omega-3s do you take?
10 grams a day.
10 grams a day of the omega RX2 liquid.
Mm-hmm.
That is heavy stuff. That's really good. Okay. some people who treat diabetes talk
Mhm.
about, well, you need to eat more fat, and they focus on fat, and they're like, yeah, this is controversial, but these are the results we've been getting. I see from the presentation that this is you're saying no, you shouldn't eat more fat. I mean, where's the middle ground here?
Well, first of all, the people who basically say eat more fat, these are the proponents of ketogenic diets.
Okay.
And we published in the premier nutritional research journal, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, back 15 years ago, a careful study of a ketogenic diet versus the zone diet, where we treated the subjects like lab rats.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the results? On the zone diet, they lost more weight. On the zone diet, they lost more fat. On the zone diet, they had greater exercise improvement in exercise tolerance. On the zone diet, they did not lose calcium from their bones. Oh, their ketogenic diet was superior in one respect. It doubled the levels of inflammation in 6 weeks' time.
They doubled the levels of inflammation. So then, what is it about it that they're getting results? Because we can't.
Well, no. Again, it's they just they think they've scrambled on say ketogenic diets have been around since of the 19th century. They rise and fall. 20 years ago, it was known as the Atkins diet. Before that, so again, that they say, I'm so smart. I just say, no, say, the body, you look at the body works on like a drug. And they say, no, I'm so smart. Say, where's the data? And so you find that these people say, they cherry pick. I've had 4 patients. It's like, great. But the fact is, say, when you compare the zone diet to any diet, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, the ketogenic diet, it doesn't matter. The zone diet always wins. I don't like the results. Say, okay, well, let's do it again. But again, it's just not the diet, because it is really all the other. Remember, when you're on a ketogenic diet, are you getting a lot of polyphenols? No. So guess what? You get 0 polyphenols. So you already have taken one of the most important wheels of the resolution response off the car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's obviously something that they're seeing.
Well, yeah, it's a short-term aspect. This is why looking at things like weight loss. You get more weight loss compared to a high carbohydrate diet.
Right.
But after 1 year, there's no difference between a high carbohydrate diet and a ketogenic diet. And they say you have a metabolic advantage. Well, we publish our papers. There's no metabolic advantage. That's just pure hogwash. Oh, you can eat all the food you want, you'll never gain a weight, saying the second law of thermodynamics still works. And so that, but they tend to ignore it because everybody's seeking their 15 minutes of fame.
Right. Interesting. All right, question about eicosanoids. Eicosanoids, when I first started listening to you, eicosanoids were a good thing, really good thing, but now it seems like...
Well, there are good ones and there are bad ones.
Okay.
Some are anti-inflammatory, most are pro-inflammatory. So trying to make the good ones and not make the bad ones is a very difficult process. Now, though some are anti-inflammatory eicosanoids, the resolvins are super hormones. They trump everything. So again, it becomes much easier from a control standpoint to try to basically reduce the bad ones and increase the really good players.
Okay. That makes more sense. Someone wants to know, okay, so we talk about processed foods. And we talked about fat, problem with fat, especially the omega-3 and the vegetable fats. But people talk about sodium in the processed foods, that the high levels of sodium. Where does that come in all this?
Well, when you have processed foods, the worst thing you want to do is having bacteria growing in the processed foods, right?
Right.
So you add salt because salt is a good way of killing bacteria.
I see.
Also, salt makes any food taste better. A processed food that's composed of like a cracker tastes terrible. Add some salt to it, boy, it tastes good. So
I see.
you're basically, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. Say it's still a pig.
And of course, it helps with the preservation too, right? It
Oh
helps.
yes, because you want longer shelf life.
Right. Right. So how does this excess sodium affect this whole picture of
It has very, very little effect.
very little effect? Okay.
Yeah,
So
because
why?
because now most of our foods, when we talk about ultra processed foods, let's look at each of the three components: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Uh, Protein is protein anyway you cut it. It's not all that different. So I don't care if it comes from animal sources or vegetarian sources, just as long as you get adequate levels at that meal. Fat, you can actually, you want to process the fat to take out the bad fat and keep the good fat. Now it's the carbohydrates. They contain the polyphenols. They contain the fermentable fiber. So what we do in terms of, let's say, treating diabetics, we're going to give you a partially processed food. We're going to give you a processed food that is rich in protein, has all the vitamins and minerals needed for that meal, and also contains highly soluble polyphenols you can't find in nature. What we want you to do is to add 2 servings of fruit to the protein, put it in a blender, and drink. So now it's a hybrid processed food, but basically it's a powerful tool to control blood sugar. Likewise, in terms of how to get vegetables. Say, I don't like vegetables. Say, okay, do you like rice? I love rice. Do you like pasta? I love pasta. Say, okay, then our challenge is to make a rice or pasta replacement that will shut down hunger like a drug, and you put your vegetables on top of it. And all of a sudden, you have a way of basically now having a hybrid form. Say, get your vegetables, put them on a plate of our rice or pasta replacement, and get your fruit. So get your 2 servings of vegetables, of fruit per day, and 6 servings of vegetables per day, and you're well on your way toward a longer life.
So this processed food, okay, you mentioned rice, you mentioned pasta. These are all available through the Zone
Yes.
the Zone website. What are they called?
Well, they're called zone pasta because they're either rice or orzo, but they're really rice and pasta replacements.
Some pasta replacement. I remember you talking when I came to visit the Zone labs. You were talking to me about rice having the effects that you were talking about. I was like, in my mind, I was like, no, that's impossible.
Well, it has the same. Do that. It has the same. That's right. Rice doesn't do that, but the Zone rice does. It has the same effect as gastric bypass surgery.
No way.
Yeah, because gastric bypass surgery changes the levels of the hormones released from the gut to go to the brain to say stop eating. So does the Zone rice and pasta and Zone cereal. And now we're making in Italy Zone desserts.
That I have to see.
Well, actually, and just now we're making it, we're using Michelin chefs to work with us.
Michelin chefs? No. Explain who those are.
The highest culinary awards are those restaurants that basically have a Michelin star, 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars. So we're using a number of Michelin chefs who basically are the cream of the crop of gourmet of chefs in Europe to work with us.
Wow. That is impressive. Okay, we'd love to see what that turns out to be. Emotional stress. I mean, you mentioned that you alluded to it earlier. Emotional stress. How can you counteract, especially with those, especially during this pandemic, a lot of that's going on, and for sure causing a lot of dysregulation in the metabolic response. How does the zone diet counteract that?
Well, when you talk about emotional stress, you're talking about increased levels of cortisol. And cortisol increases insulin resistance. And what happens? You become more stressed. So the first thing about stress is saying, oh, the pandemic, saying, you want to see a pandemic? Go back to the Black Death in 1348. That was a pandemic. So say, hey, I'm alive, and say, yeah, this is a pandemic, but even in Africa, do you see the death rates we have in America or Europe? No.
It's bizarre, isn't
it? Well, and yes, it is bizarre. And do you see the death rates in Asia? No. Well, and do they have any vaccines in Asia? No. So why do some people basically, remember, 80% of the people, if they get infected with the virus, really have, say, I had a bad cold at best. At worst, at best, is saying, I felt nothing, because their resolution response was not as blocked. And so that's why that basically you say, oh my God, what did I do? Say, okay, feed them lots of fish oil. Why? It'll reduce the cytokine storm. But who are the people who have the problems? They have either obese, or they're elderly, or they have inflammatory conditions like hypertension or diabetes. Those are the ones who are most likely to die. So it's just saying you've got a bad situation, that the coronavirus is a straw that breaks the camel's back.
Right. Next to a short accelerates the time of person's demise.
Because you already have a high level of inflammation in the body, and now the extra inflammation induced by the coronavirus is enough to say the body breaks.
Got it. Okay. Now, you've alluded to this already, but please let's address it directly. Meat and inflammation. And I mean, why is it that there's a lot of people saying you shouldn't eat meat at all, or reduce your levels of meats? Let's speak to that.
Well, there are some good environmental reasons, because beef production is, industrial beef production is barbaric. And of beef production, or of any animal production, there's a lot more environmental waste coming from the animals. Because why? They're fermenting the fiber to make things like methane, which are 20 to 30 times more insidious to the atmosphere than is carbon dioxide. So I said, okay, we want, how do you reduce global warming? Yeah, walk more, don't use your car, use less electricity, and eat less beef. Now, we'll say, so all of them are equal. Are people going to give up their cars? Highly unlikely. They're going to walk more? Highly unlikely. Use less electricity? Highly unlikely. So I said, okay, this is say you decide how to do it. But so there's a lot of good reasons from an ethical standpoint. But from a nutritional standpoint, you need adequate protein. Now, if you're on a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, the likelihood of getting adequate protein is very low. Why? Because vegetarian sources are not very rich in protein. So, but can you concentrate them up? Yes, you can. Just like, can you concentrate up omega-3 fatty acids? Yes, you can. And so that's why our zone pasta are basically vegetarian sources of protein, which are highly concentrated and now processed in such a way they replicate bypass surgery. So yeah, again, and so I'll have maybe once a month a very good quality of, let's say, beef dish. If I go out to the restaurant, I'll probably have usually a fish dish. When I go to Italy, I had the same meal after meal after meal.
What is that?
No, well, for lunch, I'll have grilled vegetables as an appetizer. Where are the best grilled vegetables in the world? Italy. For my entree, I'll have grilled fish and more grilled vegetables. And for dessert, I'll have some fresh berries. That's for lunch. What do I have for dinner? Same thing. Why? Because you're going to get the best berries in the world in Europe. You're going to get the best grilled fish in Italy and the best grilled vegetables in Italy.
Okay. I noticed you didn't mention anything about red meat. So what's...
Well, yeah, but that's why I'll go to France once a month to have some red meat. No, but that's why once a month go out and have a very good high quality steak, not a hamburger. That's low quality, but a high quality good steak, just to get some of the extra nutrients, that is the vitamin B12 and the other factors in the beef that you need small trace amounts of.
Okay. So you're basically saying, without actually saying it, that you got to really reduce your red meat consumption.
Well, you should, but again, but it's not the killer. The primary cause of the problems of red meat is the fat found in the red meat.
I see.
When you see a highly marbled steak, what you're looking at is almost pure saturated fat.
Okay.
And that causes inflammation. So when you get a very lean cut of red meat, you don't see any marbling whatsoever. I say, it doesn't taste very good. Say,
yes, it does not.
So I say, yeah, but it's better for you. It's higher quality. So you go out and try to get the leanest cut of meat you can, high quality. I say, good, I'm getting all the benefits, but I'm not getting the extra saturated fat.
Which is what causes the inflammation.
Exactly.
Okay. Awesome. I think that kind of covers it. Fantastic information. Again, yes, I think it does. Yes. Thank you so much, Doc. So website, we're looking at, if you want to talk briefly about the senescent.
Senescent cells.
Well, I know senescent cells, but your website and your company, that new company you're doing.
Well, it's not quite ready yet, so still a work in progress. So you can send it to zoneliving.com. That'd be a good starting point.
Zoneliving.com.
Yes.
Got it.
But the Cinetech food site is a quirk in the U.S. medical laws that if you can make an argument, you can get now food products approved as orphan drugs for treating disease states. So we are basically embarking upon that. And our first disease state is an unknown epidemic worldwide called fatty liver disease. And so we're getting both our Omega product and our Maki product approved as medical foods to treat fatty liver disease. And once that's complete, then we'll get them approved to treat diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, autoimmune diseases.
Trojan horse, seems like.
Well, it is, because again, what they are now powerful drugs to orchestrate the resolution. They have to be used under a doctor's supervision, but then we can train the doctor, say, how much does my patient need? The blood will tell you. So you use the blood to titrate how much of these two medical foods you need, and then try to have them follow the diet as best as possible.
That's gonna revolutionize medicine the way as we know it.
Well, let's say not in my lifetime, but maybe in the future. But you got to start somewhere.
You got to start somewhere. You definitely do. Got it. Okay, folks, this has been fascinating. Again, you got to share this with your doctors, your healthcare professionals, people in the mental health field. This applies to all these areas. Applies to health and life as a whole. So please take advantage of this wonderful information. Dr. Sears, thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure, always.
Wonderful pleasure. Thank you, sir. So have a good day, and we will certainly be talking about this more and more.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.